his little park board member vest.
Well, good evening, everybody. We'll start the workshop meeting for the 19th of April. As you are well aware, Dale couldn't be here this evening. He's traveling. And we'll get right to it. Any comments on the council minutes of the 5th? Anybody see anything there?
Pretty clear to me.
Yeah.
Do you want to do roll call first, Mike?
Yeah, we usually don't on work meetings.
Oh, okay.
I got you covered. I know who's here.
And so we can move those forward to anything on the minutes of the 12th. Anybody see any thoughts, comments?
Look good.
It looked good.
So was that a long enough delay for you, Val?
Perfect. I believe our guest is here.
Oh,
I was going to
good.
say, is Jessica Lloyd the guest?
Yeah.
So we'll move on to the presentation by the Department of Natural Resources regarding our urban tree canopies.
I'm going to
Take it away,
promote
Val.
Jessica into the meeting.
Hi, everyone. I just missed the last snippet when I was rejoining the meeting.
Don't worry.
Here.
You didn't miss much.
No,
No.
we were just letting you in. So
We're just
Yeah.
warming up for you, Jessica.
I've made it to where you can share your screen.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for putting me first. I will see if I can get this to work.
Not to hurt your feelings, but you're the only one left, the only thing left on the agenda.
My feelings
It's
are
all
not-
for you. I'll put it that way.
You are the marquee event this
Yeah,
evening.
exactly.
Okay, well, I hope I can entertain you all on it's sunny in Olympia Tuesday evening. So
Song and dance is always good.
maybe my dog might sing a little for you guys, but try to keep her quiet. But anyway, thank you all so much for having me here in this virtual space. So exciting to get to talk to a new city. I'm new to Washington myself, and yeah, I'll just be taking, I guess I have about 15 minutes, so I'm going to make it pretty brief, just to talk to you about urban and community forestry in the state of Washington, and learn more about the program where I work at the DNR Urban and Community Forestry Program. And I'll let you all know how our program can assist your city. I just want to make sure you can see my screen. Okay,
Yes.
does that look?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. And I think we'll have time at the end for questions, and but I'll just get through my presentation. So my name is Jess Lloyd. I'm the urban forestry specialist, and I'm the newest member of the urban and community forestry program team, although we're going to be growing pretty significantly within the next I guess next year. So again, I'll have some time at the end for questions, but please reach out anytime after this as well if anything comes up or sparks an interest. So this is a brief agenda of what I'm going to go over. Just sort of the main highlights of what urban forestry is and why trees and forests are important for cities. I'll talk about why we should think of trees as infrastructure, just like we would any other types of city infrastructure. I'll then go over some of the best management practices in urban forestry and steps that your city can take to start to develop an urban forestry program. I'll also talk about the Tree City USA recognition program, which provides a structure for cities to start proactively managing their urban forests. Finally, I'll introduce the program that I work for, the DNR Urban and Community Forestry Program, and let you know the different ways that we can assist the city of Brier. So why are trees and forests important in cities? Properly managed trees in our urban forests create healthy cities and communities by providing economic, ecological, and numerous social benefits. Maintaining or enhancing a city's urban tree canopy can provide shade and reduce surface temperatures in neighborhoods. It can mitigate air pollution, can enhance property values, it can improve social ties among neighbors. They can reduce stormwater pollution, save on energy costs for buildings, provide wildlife habitat, provide recreation opportunities, and provide places for respite in dense urban settings. A robust tree canopy can also attract businesses, residents, and enhance tourism. City trees can also be important for the identity and creating a sense of place in your community. Research shows that about 30% tree canopy cover, you really start to see the health benefits that trees provide. And at about 40% at the neighborhood level, you can get much more significant cooling effects. So we already talked a little bit about the many benefits that trees provide. It's important to remember that in cities, trees can only provide many of these benefits we enjoy when they're healthy. Healthy cities and trees, because of all, I guess, the complex factors in urban ecosystems, they usually require proactive management and maintenance to keep them healthy. The urban forest is part of the green infrastructure in our cities, and because of the values and benefits that they provide, both monetary, social, and ecological, it's important that we treat them like any other component of city infrastructure. For a municipality, seeing trees as infrastructure can help emphasize the importance in investing in proactive urban forest management. When cities invest in their trees, they provide more benefits in return. So this is just an example to better illustrate some of those quantifiable benefits that trees provide. This is a tool called iTree, which analyzes the economic benefits that trees provide. And this is from the city of Tacoma. And we're looking, I don't know if you can see my cursor. You see that? At an individual Douglas fir tree, they have the address there, and then the different economic benefits that the trees providing the city. So the overall monetary benefits are $147. And this is taken considering the energy conservation value from the tree providing shade on buildings, $6 for the carbon it's sequestering from the atmosphere and storing in its wood, $53 for stormwater management from the costs of intercepting and storing rainfall, and $32 for increasing property values from the beauty it provides. So this is just one tree in the city of Tacoma, but if you think about all the trees in a city, that is actually a pretty substantial economic benefit.
Is that savings on considered a yearly basis or just overall span of the tree?
That is a really good question. My understanding is that it's the overall lifespan of the tree, but I will have to go back and look specifically at this analysis to make sure I'm answering your question correctly.
Guess if this is anything similar to the tool for calculating a tree equity score, which I've seen also, I think very similar, that carbon and these monetary benefits are actually calculated on an annual basis.
It is annual.
Rather than a lifetime.
That would make some sense because at 50,
Yeah.
I would think for the stormwater, just going to that one.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Then you've corrected me because the tree equity tool actually is informed by a lot of the same type of analysis, but with additional social data. So I'm glad you're familiar with the tree equity score. I didn't actually include that in this presentation, but I would be curious to hear if you've looked at the analysis for the city of Brier and how that's made you think about the distribution of canopy in your city. So what is an urban forest? In highly urbanized environments, people don't often realize that they're part of a larger urban forest ecosystem. When people think of forests, they think of national parks or woodlands where large amounts of timber is harvested. But the urban forest is all the trees where we live, street trees, park trees, the trees in your neighbor's lawn that don't sweep up their acorns, or a big tree in a schoolyard where your kid eats its lunch at school. They're the old weeping beech trees at your local cemetery, or the trees that are often precariously growing under power lines. They're the trees in city parking lots or along the trail where you ride your bike. They're the remnant forested lands within your city limits. They're also the products you make from the wood when they have to be cut down. So urban forests are the trees in any woody or associated vegetation within an urban setting. So what is urban forestry? Just want to highlight that managing our urban forests is a cooperative effort, but it's one from which we all can benefit. At its core, urban forestry is the planting, maintenance, care, and protection of tree populations in urban and suburban settings. Because urban ecosystems are connected with so many other aspects of urban life, urban forestry takes place at multiple scales, from your city block to your city park. There are many stakeholders involved, from a local community tree advocate to city leaders who want to make their communities healthier places to live. Urban forestry can have multiple goals for things like climate resiliency or promoting public health. There are many ways to achieve these urban forestry goals, either through policy, education, investment, or things like fines and permits, to name a few. Because of these many scales, stakeholders, goals, and management needs that urban forestry operates within, urban forestry planning and management can be quite complex. It's also important to note that at the city scale, where you all are thinking about, there are many stakeholders in city departments that may touch on urban forestry. So things like the Parks Department, Public Works, Stormwater, and planners. We've seen a lot of success from cities that have sort of collaborative working groups across these sometimes siloed departments to work towards shared goals and assign responsibilities for their urban forest management. So what sort of steps can your city take to transform their urban forestry program? I'm not yet familiar with the city of Brier, but I'm looking forward to learning more about sort of where you all are at and where you're thinking about heading. A lot of cities and towns operate sort of in this reactive management mode, primarily answering to concerns from local residents and about hazardous and nuisance trees. Ultimately, what causes cities to shift from reactive to proactive management can vary. For some cities, it's advocacy from local residents. It can also be from new funding opportunities. Some cities fund their urban forestry programs through stormwater taxes. It can be from a partnership with a local nonprofit or university that leads in tree planting and stewardship efforts. Or government leaders may feel the need to act to protect their city trees based on growing development pressure. So I just wanted to highlight these for urban and community forestry best management practices. They sort of serve as the foundation for that proactive urban forest management. And these types of projects are also supported by the DNR Urban and Community Forestry Program, both with technical assistance and with financial assistance. And I don't know if your city has any of these. They're sort of at the sort of upper level of urban forest management when you think about it on a continuum. So the first is a tree inventory. This is essentially a tree census or sample of trees within a defined area. This type of data is collected by people on the ground that record the location and different characteristics about an individual tree species and its condition. This can be used to understand species age and diversity to promote a more resilient forest. It can also be used to prioritize maintenance efforts. A tree canopy assessment is a little bit different. So tree inventory is on the ground. Canopy assessment is looking above, using satellite, aerial, and LiDAR imagery to map out the tree canopy cover within a defined area. So we actually have an assessment for the city of Brier, if you are interested, and I'll touch on that briefly later in this talk. But canopy assessments are good for tracking sort of large trends, and you can also look at canopy cover across different land ownerships. So not just public right-of-way trees that are usually captured in tree inventories, but all tree canopy within private property, commercial property, and public property. And it can be really utilized for different types of goal setting and urban planning. So a forest plan or manual, we have a picture again of the City of Tacoma's urban forest manual is more of a strategic plan that sets those bigger picture goals and objectives for urban forest policy and planning. And then there's an operations or urban forest management plan, which helps provide recommendations for the day-to-day structure and activities of crews or departments to manage their city's trees. So next, I wanted to mention the Tree City USA program, which I think you may be familiar with. This is a great sort of first step for cities to take to move towards proactive management of their urban forests. The award recognizes cities that have established the foundation of a self-sustaining urban and community forestry program. These are some of the highlights of the Tree City program in Washington from 2020. I don't think they've come out with 2021 yet, but there are 93 Tree City USA communities. I think the oldest is Ellensburg, and most cities that once they're in the program, they're usually able to easily meet the standards to keep up with their Tree City status. The Arbor Day Foundation has also created a growth award to recognize cities that go sort of above and beyond the Tree City recognition requirements and expand their urban forestry programs with activities such as restoration work, addressing environmental equity, performing an inventory, hosting tree care and stewardship events, and promoting cross-departmental collaboration and lots of other things. It's also sort of a source of pride for a lot of cities throughout Washington. So these are those 4 core qualifying standards. These provide a framework for a healthy urban and community forestry program within a city. So the first is establishing a tree board or a department. So the intent of this standard is to assign the responsibility for the management of the community's trees. This can be met by having a professional forester, an arborist, an entire department or tree board, which is a group of volunteer citizens charged with developing and administering a tree management program. The second requirement, which is sort of in line with the first, is developing a public tree care ordinance. So the ordinance also establishes a tree board or forestry department and gives them the responsibility for public tree care. It should also assign the task of crafting and implementing a plan of work. The third requirement is the city's urban forestry program must have an annual budget of at least $2 per capita. This is actually surprisingly fairly easy for cities to meet because they can include all sorts of expenditures like workers' salaries, any tree planting or watering or fertilizing, any types of equipment rentals or purchases, workshops or memberships that employees attend, or volunteer hours as well. And the final requirement for the Tree City USA standard is an Arbor Day observance and proclamation. The state Arbor Day just passed this last week on April 13th, although you can really celebrate it any day of the year. So this is the opportunity when your city gets to celebrate its trees and everyone involved in tree stewardship. Cities have found really creative ways to celebrate during the pandemic, but typically involves some sort of tree planting or a public event like a walk to educate residents and celebrate a city's trees. So I think I'm a little over my time and we'll keep going. So what is the DNR Urban and Community Forestry Program? Like I mentioned before, urban forest management really is a collective effort across many scales and entities. Local government agencies, nonprofits, schools, and community organizations all have a role to play in stewarding urban forests. The DNR Urban and Community Forestry Program, our role is to assist local and tribal governments, educational institutions, and nonprofit organizations by providing education, technical assistance, and financial assistance. So we operate in this middle ring here. So kind of what that means is we don't necessarily provide assistance to private residents or for-profit companies. So a little bit more about our program. The mission of the DNR Urban and Community Forestry Program is to provide leadership to create self-sustaining urban and community forestry programs that preserve, plant, and manage forests and trees for public benefits and quality of life. We do this by providing sort of these three buckets of assistance: educational, technical, and financial assistance. Historically, our program has been funded with pass-through dollars from the U.S. Forest Service, but in 2021, the Washington State Legislature passed the Evergreen Communities Act, which will support the growth of our program and capacity to offer more assistance to cities like yours. So a little bit more about educational assistance that we offer. We connect communities with resources and tools for urban forestry best management practices, either by request or through our Tree Link newsletter. And we also have an online urban forestry stewardship course. We host seminars and presentations on tree-related topics. We're happy to provide information and guidance to our local partners that are going through local tree issues. One example of educational assistance that we provided was a young tree pruning training for city staff in the city of College Place in Walla Walla last year. That was one of my first job tasks that I started when I came to join the program. The second bucket is technical assistance. So we play a statewide role in reviewing urban forestry policies, tree ordinances, or plans your community might be producing or reviewing. We also provide guidelines for tree selection, tree planting and maintenance, tree inventories, and tree protection. That's sort of my role. So if you have a technical related tree or urban forestry question, you can send me an email. Or if you just want to ID a certain tree, that's always fun for me too. So we also provide financial assistance in two ways. One is an Arbor Day reimbursement. That's only for Tree City USA communities. This is a $500 annual reimbursement for a ceremonial Arbor Day tree. Second and more substantial financial assistance is through our annual grant program. The program has closed for this year, but we funded up to $550,000 worth of urban forestry projects, which is the most in our program's history. These projects include things like traditional tree plantings or urban food forests or community engagement activities. But because of this legislation that passed in 2021, the majority of our funding was awarded to assist communities with those sort of essential proactive urban forest management tools. So tree inventories, canopy analyses, and things like management plans. So the program is closed for this year, but we open our grants in the fall. So definitely stay in touch if that's something your city is interested in applying for. So I want to briefly touch on this Evergreen Communities Act and the recognition program that's sort of going to shape the way that our program is moving towards in the next few years. The ECA, which is the Evergreen Communities Act, is a landmark legislation for urban forestry in Washington. It's been introduced and passed a couple times, but finally was established into law in 2021. But essentially the intent is to provide, or the goal is to geographically prioritize delivery of our program services and resources based on health disparity, salmon recovery and watershed restoration, and urban tree canopy cover. To meet these goals, we're providing funding for communities to perform tree inventories, canopy analysis, and to develop urban forest management plans. Again, those elements I mentioned for best urban forest management practices earlier. So the new language in the ECA would dedicate a portion of the funding to support salmon recovery, human health, and environmental justice in communities that are most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. Another component of the legislation is establishing this Evergreen Community Recognition Program. This program is still in development, but essentially will build off of that Tree City USA program that I highlighted before, but with some additional requirements with things like tree inventories and management plans. But it's still forthcoming and will be in development this year. So in order to develop that program and meet all these other goals, we're hiring a bunch of new staff. So they'll be onboarded within 2022, and we'll have a Evergreen Communities Coordinator, an inventory specialist and technician, a grants manager, a GIS specialist, and a contract specialist. So that's our urban forestry team right now. So that's our program manager, Ben, our outreach specialist, Daria. I'm here in the middle, and then we have two sort of regional community assistance foresters, and Jeremy does work in Snohomish County, so is another great resource for your city if you have technical questions. So in addition to sort of those three buckets of assistance that we provide, our program is also involved with other statewide projects. One of those is the Puget Sound Urban Tree Canopy and Stormwater Management Handbook. This project promotes urban forestry as a tool for managing stormwater runoff, and was a project that was developed in partnership with the King Conservation District and brought together practitioners across the disciplines of urban forestry and stormwater management to look at the different tools that measure the capacity of trees to mitigate stormwater runoff. The second is our urban forest pest readiness project. This project provides tools and resources to help cities better prepare for the next potential outbreak of an invasive pest in Washington. We're currently building a statewide database of street and park tree inventory data for cities that have inventories so that we can analyze them to assess different risk vulnerabilities to particular invasive pests and their host tree species. The third, which is a project that might be more of interest to your city, is the Puget Sound Urban Tree Canopy Assessment Project. This was a joint project with the Washington chapter of the Nature Conservancy. They conducted an urban tree canopy analysis for every incorporated municipality within King, Pierce, and Snohomish County. So this helped identify both sort of the current tree canopy and land cover and identify priority planting locations. And I'll show you a little bit of what that looks like here. So we touched on this a little bit, but urban tree canopy assessments allow cities to sort of prioritize planting or their urban forestry goals based on different social, economic, and ecological criteria. This assessment I'm showing here is just the land cover data, but they also did a further analysis to look at how to prioritize tree planting to meet goals for stormwater, to address urban heat island, and to promote social equity. So this is just a glimpse at some of the outcomes of the project. The map here shows the different land cover types that were analyzed for the city of Brier. So the dark green is tree canopy, the light green is sort of low-lying vegetation, the gray is all impervious surface, brown is bare soil, and the blue is open water. So the city actually has relatively high tree canopy cover relative to the rest of the cities in Snohomish County. So from this analysis, the city has about 40% tree canopy cover. So just based off this, you might be thinking more about how do we protect our current trees rather than where do we plant more trees. This graph over here shows, again, the tree canopy, which is 40%, the impervious surface, which is 29%, and then this potential planting space, which in the analysis, they took that low vegetation and bare soil and combined that together and then removed any things where you wouldn't want to plant trees. So things like athletic fields or airports or agriculture fields where they already have a land use that you wouldn't want to necessarily change into forest. And that's what they use to identify areas for potential tree planting. So this type of information could be used to inform goals for if you did want to grow your tree canopy cover. And I think that is all I have. Thank you for your time. I'm gonna stop sharing unless you want me to go back to anything.
Wow, thank you, Jessica.
I went over my time a little bit.
Who's got questions?
I think Brier looked pretty good on those numbers compared to the county.
I like the idea that using the inventory could be a preventative way of handling possible pests, because knowing that some of our forests in Brier are fairly homogeneous, it would be helpful, I think, at some point to have that idea of a long range idea of where we might be. Like, for instance, there's a birch beetle that's massacring all of our birch trees. And so it would be helpful in a sort of holistic way to have that vision. So I like that tool is possibly available. Can you talk more just a little bit about what it takes to go from a tree canopy assessment to the actual inventory? Is that's something that we could potentially apply for a grant for?
Yeah, so the tree canopy assessment, that was just part of a grant project through the U.S. Forest Service, and they decided to focus on those 3 counties because that's where the urban populations reside in the state of Washington. Right now, there's not plans to do an initial one, or there's not funding to do additional canopy analysis at that scale for every city, but cities can apply for grants to do more canopy analysis. That data was from actually 2017, so it is possible that and likely that has shifted a little bit with development patterns in the state. So it's something, if your city was interested in, they could do an additional canopy analysis. A tree inventory is, I would say, more useful for, again, that sort of management that happens on the ground. And that is also something you could apply for a grant for. A lot of cities historically have planted like the same types of tree species over time. It's usually, see a lot of maples in Washington. And so it's really important to have that individual tree data so you can understand that those sort of patterns within your city at that fine scale, which you wouldn't see in a canopy analysis. So you could see exactly how many maple trees were in your city, or birch trees, like you mentioned, that might have certain health issues, and what you can do to sort of manage and strategically provide management actions, whether that's proactive pest management or, planting different tree species when you do have a new planting, that would be addressed sort of in an urban forest management plan. Typically that's based on a tree inventory. I hope I explained that right. The canopy assessments are more sort of bigger picture. I'd say they're better for like policy makers and planners. They're not great for the practitioners who are managing forests like on the ground.
Jess, there's a kind of a timeliness to your being here this evening. There's a meeting with the Planning Commission tomorrow evening. There's a 5-acre property in the Brier area where 240 trees exist, 121 of which will be tagged for removal in order to put homes in place there. So that's going to be a discussion among the community. People, I'm sure, have already raised some of their comments about removing 50% of the tree cover. But if I take a look at that, removing 120 trees to meet the needs of, I think, 5 or 8 new houses, and then going back to your eye tool showing our tree coverage, et cetera, there was another calculation that tree equity score for Brier revealed, which was that if Brier were truly wanting to have an optimal tree coverage, a tree canopy in line with what is considered to be the best urban canopy of maintenance, we would have to plant 3,477 trees throughout Brier in order to retain that canopy, that lush canopy necessary. And as I think through that, that's sort of a conflict with developers who want to build homes. And then ideally, I can't figure out where we would put 3,500 new trees throughout the city of Brier in all practical terms. So just wondering, how do we balance that? Behind this, there's the pressure from Snohomish County for us to actually actively endorse an urban tree canopy policy for the Snohomish County area. I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts. I mean, I don't know if obviously my interest might be different than a city's interest that wants to attract more residents and people that want to build houses. But I guess if it is in the city's interest to protect the tree canopy and provide sort of a healthy community for the residents there, probably the strongest way to address sort of development pressure is in tree policies and ordinances, and providing, cities they look really different across different cities. Sometimes there's a certain percentage of canopy cover that within a plot that's designated to be developed has to retain. Sometimes it's a number of trees. Sometimes it's based on sort of the health and condition of those trees, based on trees that need to be retained versus additional planting that needs to compensate for the trees that are going to be removed. We just reviewed an ordinance for the city of Vancouver, who also had a large fee that was associated with tree removal for developers, and that fee was pretty substantial and could potentially be used to help fund additional planting opportunities. Of course, it doesn't address the whole question, like more people are moving to Washington. So there's more pressure and interest to create more houses and more pavement. And I guess in bigger cities like Vancouver and Canada, you see a lot more like high rise and high density housing, and those aren't always in line with sort of the residential feel of certain cities and neighborhoods, but I think that has been advocated for in some of those larger cities as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a challenge. As we've had different replacement rules or money people can pay in to different degrees of success, or how we could leverage the funds. And certainly, as you noted, being single family homes versus somebody who's putting in a high density, and you can kind of say, okay, you're putting all this in one spot, we can get more out of this from the trees. It's harder in our individual home communities for people still have the property rights and the building and construction. So finding that balance is definitely
Sorry.
a challenge. No, if they heard if you have it on speaker, they heard my dog going off. It was, we'll get talking to each other, except they can't hear yours. But anyway, so it's definitely something that we've always trying to figure out how to best balance and manage.
Seems a little odd that the county would say something to us about trees when they just cleared 50 acres to the east of us.
Yeah.
One more question that because our city is so tightly managed with staff, we don't have a ton of people to throw at doing some of this work. And I'm primarily curious if there's a model of another small city with bare bones staff who's managed to satisfy the requirements, for example, of Tree City USA, just to understand the details of how that would be managed. How can you have the tree department when we couldn't even dedicate an entire staff person to that. It's not even a quarter of a staff person. How do we have a tree board when we might not have sufficient people to do that? These are questions I can follow up with you, but just like top of mind would be as if there's a couple of smaller cities that might be models to us that we could use as potential resources.
Sure, and I'm sorry again for the background noise. So we actually have a lot of small cities, like really small ones in Washington that are tree cities, and that always really kind of blows me away. I think the biggest barrier is, yeah, like adopting that tree ordinance policy. So unless you have, you know, people really pushing for that to be adopted by the city, that is probably going to be the largest barrier in terms of the tree board. That can be an all volunteer board, and it typically is. So it's kind of important to just identify like a tree advocate within the community. So I don't know if there's a, you know, Friends of XYZ Park, or someone that comes to city council meetings and ask questions about trees, but like that might be someone you could identify as a potential advocate for something like a tree board. In terms of cities that come to mind that are smaller tree cities, I mean, there's a lot, like the city of, I'm going to provide some better examples, I think, on a follow-up. I mean, some, yeah, just sort of meet the minimum requirements. But like, for example, the city of Twisp is a tree city, and they have a really small population, which actually might, I guess, could be easier potentially if you're have a smaller sort of local government. You can potentially pass some of those, the ordinance a little bit easier. But I'll look for comparable cities to Brier and see if I have some better examples that I can follow up with you on.
That's fine. I didn't mean to ask you off the cuff.
No, you're good. I'm still really new too, so I apologize. I'm not, my boss who had my position before me and is now our program manager, he's been with the program for over a decade, and I'll be sure to follow up with him too on some of these questions, and I'll deliver it to Valerie, and Valerie can decide how you want to distribute my responses as well.
And just
so kind of funny enough, I'm actually in Twisp right now, and one difference between Twisp and Brier is they have huge lots over here, and not a lot of people, and so maybe an example of a city that's very similar to Brier would be helpful.
Yeah, they actually don't even have street trees there.
Right.
The last time I just drove through there recently, and yeah, so they're more thinking about sort of how to manage natural areas, and but yeah, they don't have a lot of urban trees.
I was gonna guess Twist too, Dave. That was my guess.
He had to take the long route there.
It looks like Twist. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had to cut down some trees to form this little frame behind me here.
Hey, Jess, I have your email address. I'm going to send you a document. Valerie and I met with the Snohomish County Council Commissioner just several weeks back. She and the city council there have put forth an endorsement of an urban tree canopy policy for the entire county, Snohomish County, which will most likely have impact for most of its unincorporated cities. Okay. And the offshoot of that is that in recommending an urban tree canopy policy to their planning commission, they've now delayed any decision on it until 2024, when they update their Growth Management Act and comprehensive plan. And they haven't really got a permission to endorse. There's a permission to discuss further the impact of an urban tree canopy policy for Snohomish County. And there was a lot of support. Of course, Valerie and I were very interested in hearing more, but the most stringent and probably the most strident responses that were against the endorsement came from none other than the Master Builders Association. Mm-hmm. I can forward that to you. It's about an 8-bullet screed of all the reasons why sort of an urban tree canopy policy doesn't necessarily make great sense for Snohomish County, including some aspects of the policy actually being illegal by Washington law. So it might be something you should become familiar with, and your view on that to help us also kind of balance that point of view against what our citizens here would like in terms of endorsing an urban tree canopy policy would be interesting. So I'll forward that to you to have a peek at.
That would be great, Don. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I probably should have mentioned this. Our program is not regulatory, like a lot of the other policies that DNR implements with forest practices. But yeah, I would love to take a look and sort of arm you all with the best tools you can to advocate for urban trees. I know it's tough, but thank you.
I
Thank
just
you.
have one question. Is that through my years on council and the Growth Management Act, they're trying to have us densify this city. And even there was some certain legislation that didn't get through the legislature just recently on that, even more densify our city, which would mean taking down more trees.
Right.
So I'm confused where one part of the state is telling us to densify and tear down trees and build up. And then we got the DNR and you telling us to save our trees. So we're getting two messages from the state of Washington here.
Sure. I don't have a great response to that. I think like urban building density, like in the long term, will create more opportunities for tree planting if you have more densely occupied cities over, say, lots of small residential developments. So I think in the long term, sort of some of those goals align, although just general urbanization and increasing population demands are going to lead to canopy loss. So our role is to sort of advocate to find ways to creatively preserve and protect trees. I mean, I would sort of argue that most people wouldn't want to live in a city without trees, although they do exist. I had another comment I was going to add, but I guess in terms of building spaces and policies, we've seen some cities get, I don't know if the word is creative, but like a lot of cities will have sort of offsets of how they need to space buildings within a certain property line to allow for trees to be able to grow. So sort of like in a residential property, it would be your backyard and your front yard, and your house has to be offset a certain amount. So our program would sort of advocate to provide enough space for larger trees to grow in those offset spaces where buildings are being developed. But if there's existing tree canopy, trees that are already in the ground are better than trees that are going to be planted. So you might be willing to shift that policy a little bit if you're protecting a tree that's in the ground.
Dennis,
I don't know if that answered your question, but
Dennis, I'll just share my observation in reading both sides of the aisle, so to speak. So we have the urban tree policy, which is suggesting perhaps that we're not doing enough to maintain forests. And then we have the Builders Association that's looking at the same tree volume, the same maps that the forestry department is looking at, and they're seeing a different metric altogether. They're seeing that we've actually fulfilled and kept the tree volume where it should be. So someone considers tree canopy as the volume of leaf cover. Some people consider the number of old growth trees as the metric. And I think finding the yin and the yang of what is the true measure of success for the balance between adequate tree coverage and adequate densification, therein is the rub. One sees it as adequate. We're doing our job for the last 20 years. Some people think we're losing tree canopy. And I think there's still a difficulty about how one measures what truly is adequate forestry coverage or tree coverage for a specific density or specific city.
Okay, any other questions for Jessica?
I've been taking
Thank
some
you,
notes.
Jessica.
Yeah. No, just to follow up on your comment with how cities measure urban tree canopy coverage, there are some different ways that cities do it. And I think there's value in different ways to think about it. Like you mentioned, one is just tree canopy. Another is sort of placing a higher value on these heritage or larger historical trees. A lot of cities use this a tree unit, which is a little bit complicated. But I have seen a lot of cities throughout Washington sort of use that. It's not based on an individual tree. So it's a little bit different way to think about it. And because we're not a regulatory agency, we haven't really defined what is adequate. Okay. Although it's sort of understood in this climate and within cities, where you're at with the 40%, if thinking about just tree canopy cover is a good number to be at.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you all for having me. And
Thanks again.
I'm looking forward to providing some more thoughts and some follow-ups. So thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
And at the end here, anybody have anything else that they'd like to get on the table for another time or future or today?
Just a shout out that I've been passed by 3 or 4 Brier trucks with the brand new logo on them in the last week or so.
Yeah, I saw that.
Paul, I don't know if you ever figured, I know I sent you the information files. We actually had the SVG files in there as well as that AI file.
Yeah.
They were both of them, but it's all good.
Martin, you'll have to come to the office and show me out of all those different files that are in there what all of that means, because I don't.
I will gladly do. We can help you out, because actually the one will work better in some of your work.
I was like, the SV what?
You know what? Yeah, that's what happened. Actually, the graphics people that were doing it, I don't know, you may have seen the comments about on the billing site, which I've noticed it's a little fuzzy. We'll get that squared away. But what happened was they were trying to expand the bid image one, so it was really blocking on that. That wasn't going to look so good. They needed the vector graphics. So
I sent them a whole little set and said, "Here, find the one you need," because I don't know.
That'll work. Obviously, they succeeded.
I also need to talk to you about website RFP at some point. So
and Val sent me
start to think about some time.
Yep.
The Parks Board asked about their banners with the new logo too. They want that.
Oh yes, I already sent over logo to Kristen because she said she'd help design it. So
good. And Kristen's listening right now.
Yes, I see that.
Hi, Kristen.
Will city council members required to get a tattoo with that logo now?
Yes, right in the middle of your forehead.
I feel like I already have one of those.
Right.
Also, Paul, a city stamp. Can we get a city stamp with the new logo?
That's a great question. What kind of stamp?
That was a Parks Board question.
What kind of stamp are you looking for?
Oh, to put on kids' hands?
That's where I went, Val. It's funny.
No, I think it was for envelopes or for something. I can
embossing stationery.
No, so you're talking the city seal, and no, there is an official one of those.
Okay.
That
when she notarizes stuff, you gotta. Oh no, that's your own.
No, we don't use it for notary. I have a notary stamp that's totally separate because I have to apply for my notary every 3 years.
Melting wax and stamping it.
Yeah, we're not doing
with
that.
The signet ring.
That's a no, John. You've heard Dale say that I say no a lot. That's a no, John.
Did you ask about the tattoos yet for the kids?
Yeah, that's right. City of Brier tramp
stamps. That we can probably come up with, for C Scare. All right.
There you go.
Okay, are we wrapping it up, Mr. Gallagher?
Then I guess it's adjournment.
All right.
Terrific. Everybody
Thanks all
have
for
a good night.
Doing the tree study.
See 6 of you next week, please.
Okay.
Al, are
Everybody,
we able to
everybody
get
but
a,
Mr. Gallagher.
And I'm gonna try.
Have a great time, Mike.
Yeah. Happy travels.